Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Doblecaro, and welcome back to Politics in Perspective. A lot going on this week in the states as opposed to the federal government, although we're going to start out talking about the new initiative in my opening statement regarding China's AI robbery. But we're going to do something unique to this show for, at least for us this time. We're going to have two different guests, one covering what's going on in California in the governor's race, and then what happened in Virginia. We're pressed for time, so let's get right to my opening statement and China's AI robbery. Uh, and this relates back to what the show I had about the dangers of the 2030s with Brigadier General retired Blaine Holt. It is this advancement in AI quantum computing that makes these things so very dangerous. So let's go to our first clip from my appearance on Fox just this past week.
The U.S. accusing China of stealing AI secrets, with the White House Science and Technology Director writing on X, quote, "The U.S. has evidence that foreign entities, primarily in China, are running industrial-scale distillation campaigns to steal American AI. We will be taking action to protect American innovation. These foreign entities are using tens of thousands of proxies and jailbreaking techniques in coordinated campaigns to systematically extract American breakthroughs." Now, this escalation, major escalation, comes just weeks before President Trump is set to visit Beijing. Joining me now is the host of Politics in Perspective, Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, we want your perspective on this. Yet another reminder, and we need to always drive this home. China is not merely a competitor, as Joe Biden said. They are an adversary, and they're stealing our stuff.
Yes, and it goes beyond that. In the old days, you would have manufactured things over in China and they'd steal your secrets from the manufacturing floor. Now, as technology advances at such a rapid pace, I like to say we're in a race against technological time. They can sit from afar, just like Iran, hack our systems or download our systems and steal this data and then use it against the United States in some respects as well. So it's a very serious issue. Well, there you go. That sets it up because what China is doing is different in quantum degree to what used to have happened before. So I want to pull up the 4 points I'd like to cover today on this particular issue. Again, for decades, China has been doing this particular thing, which is stealing American trade secrets. Some say that the amount of that today is in theft and cost to the US economy is somewhere between a quarter of a trillion to 600 billion, 6/10 of a trillion dollars per year. Well, if you do that over 20 years, you see this comes at an enormous economic pain to the United States, literally trillions of dollars. Why do they do this? Well, this shouldn't be a surprise. Communism doesn't provide incentives, profit incentives, to be innovative. But the communist system does reward theft. Communism has been stealing from capitalists since the beginning of communism. So the third point is how much advanced this has become. Because as quantum computing and AI come together, the ability to sit away from afar and steal things is enormous. They literally can sit at a computer, query these OpenAI and other systems, Grok, find out how they respond to things, and then replicate that. The analogy is in the old days, you'd look at a website and then you'd have a mimicked website that looks remarkably like that. Well, that's what they're doing with certain programs that are out there, mimicking them, stealing the data. It isn't just, though, from afar. There's a famous case of a Google employee from mainland China who came here, stole the trade secrets, uploaded it, bragged about it, went back home to China and replicated it and told the world and got investors saying, I can now do this cheaper. This is a dangerous thing, and American companies need to do a better job with regard to who they hire a very difficult thing to do, which is to vet people much harder and in a better way. Why does this matter? It isn't just the economic loss, because as we discussed in my previous 2030s, the Dangerous Decade episode with Brigadier General Blaine Holt, this matters because they aren't just stealing trade secrets. They're also going to put these systems up. They're going to put this information on the internet, and they're going to post lies in there about America and its history and use that to sow dissent in America. This is the asymmetric warfare. Remember, China is not going to line up troops on the Mexican border to fight America to the finish. Iran's not going to do that. Russia is not going to do that. But they do what we've been calling a fifth generation warfare or asymmetric warfare, which is to try to harm us economically, China stealing trade secrets and the like, but also sowing dissent in America. And what does that mean? Well, using these platforms, funding education in America to put up anti-American rhetoric and get college students and the like to protest, and causing internal dissent here, which causes us to focus on ourselves and reduces our ability to project power abroad and check the actions of China. This is not an old circumstance. If you look at the end of Greek democracy, it was consumed with class warfare. They were fighting each other. They weren't watching the outside world, and Philip of Macedon came in and took over. If there wasn't that internal fighting and there were more unity, the ancient Greeks may have seen what was coming and defended themselves, but that didn't occur. And China and Iran rely on this dissension in America. Iran is literally the regime, or what's left with it, is hoping to outlast America. Well, what does that mean? That means the American will is broken and we give up on reducing the regime to the point where it could collapse. And so they survive. That's their win. We survived. And how do they get there? By American dissent stopping American action with respect to Iran. And we saw this recently among Democrats, none worse than Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. And if we bring it up here, we have Senator Scott saying that Senator Murphy should be expelled from the Senate because he's an embarrassment. What did Chris Murphy do? Chris Murphy did two things of note here. One, he went to Barcelona during this war. In the olden days, 30 years ago, if America was in a war, foreign policy disputes ended at the shore, and when people went abroad, they didn't attack America. Well, Chris Murphy went to Barcelona, and he said we're in the middle of an authoritarian takeover by Trump. This war is an example of what Chris Murphy said was part of the authoritarian takeover. But he didn't stop there. Apparently, he met with people from Iran, but beyond that, there was a dispute. Iran, which lies, what's left of the regime, which lies every day it speaks, said that they had participated and or broken the blockade, and said a certain number of ships got through. Chris Murphy tweeted, "Awesome." Now, he then backtracked on that and said, why do I have to explain that that is sarcasm? Because, Senator Murphy, if you were a mature adult, you would realize that the Iranian government or any adversary is not going to, they're going to take a picture of what you said, and here's what a U.S. senator thinks. They're not going to explain, oh, later on, he said it was sarcasm. No, you have to be very careful when you speak on the world stage, because your words will be twisted by them. And so you can't leave it to question whether it's sarcasm or not. Now, you hate President Trump. You say this virtually every day of the week, but the manner in which you have become a U.S. Senator demonstrates that you lack the maturity for that office, and you should be expelled. At least I would expel you if it was up to me. All right, that's my opening statement. Thank you to Ex America News, AUN TV for covering us, worldviewtube.com for covering us. And we'll be right back with our first guest to talk about what's going on in California and whether a Republican could win the governorship. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hey everyone, welcome back to Politics in Perspective. As most of you know, I'm based in California, and California is actually interesting this year when it comes to politics. We have a governor's race. We have what I call the 6 or 7 dwarves of Democrats running. We have 2 Republicans at the top of the polls. This matters because we have this stupid top 2 system where the top 2 in the primary go on to November. So the question is, who's going to be in the top 2 and what's happening in California politics? And one of the most connected in that regard is my friend Mike Netter, who's actually running for state senate in there as well, very active in social media. So Mike, there you are. People, you can get his website right there, and also definitely follow him on X because the guy, tons of people follow. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing simply fantastic. I'm still in California, behind the blue curtain, as we call it, but we have a lot of hope this cycle. And I think our hope is actually translating to reality for the first time, Tom, in a very long time.
Okay, so what? Why? Tell people why.
I think a lot has to do, for begin with, there's a point, people talk about California being a blue state, a liberal state, and certainly when it comes to ideology, it might float that way, but let's get real. I say this quite often. Everybody I know, regardless of political party, where they're from, likes water, for example. California does a horrible job of managing it. It costs too much. We've been running out in specific parts. Nothing California does well. Everybody likes electricity. All due deference to the Amish. And if you're watching this show, you probably do. Our utility rates have shot up to number 2, only to Hawaii in the country. Gasoline is well documented. We pay a lot more. And unless you own a tent company, and Tom, I'm pretty sure you don't, you're probably not for the homeless. Because if you own a tent company, it's a great business model. But the reality is, it's a struggle for the Democrats to tell me, or the liberals when they ask me. I say, look, when we started the recall many years ago, 5 years ago, tell me one thing that's going well in California. And outside of Newsom's supposedly swarthy looks, they really got nothing.
They didn't even say tent sales?
Well, they were up a little bit. People were happy at some of the particular sporting goods stores, but then thanks to business regulations, they've gone out of business. So really, that isn't even working out well.
All right, so how does this translate into an opportunity today for Republicans in California?
Well, I think I played a lot of sports in my day, and for starters, not only how well you play, it's how bad is the competition. And I like the way you said the dwarfs, and dwarfs will be an upgrade, the tallest of the pygmies, if you will, amongst the Democratic gubernatorial candidates. And you could substitute tall if you're going for Katie Porter going the other way. There's really no strength. When I was watching the debate the other night, you really take a look back, even after Swadwell has dropped out, allegedly, and I'll get to that in a second, you look at this and go, this is really the best that they have. And folks who watch the show, like you and I, are deep into policy, conservatism versus liberalism, and what drives the system. But the reality is, people tend to vote for folks they like, for people that drive them, that they view as good leaders. And you look at this group of Democratic politicians running for governor, in fact, pretty much across the spectrum in California, and you've got to go, wow, this is a team which isn't looking so good. And the reality is, they just don't have anybody who really grabs you, really can articulate things that need to be changed to California, which obviously is a lot. And frankly, face the camera when we talk about, look about the grading of the candidates, the other grading of news.
Okay, well, let's stop you there. Let's stop you
Hold
there,
on.
because there's two things that struck me about the debate. Two moments where they were grading Newsom and their answer with regard to road signs. So focus, if you will, on the protection of people who can't read road signs.
Look, Becerra has to break out the racist card, because that's kind of all that they have. It's actually pretty funny. Look, when you pass Matt Mahan, who, by the way, if you hadn't noticed, he's been mayor of San Jose. If it had been a drinking game in the over-under, I'd have been pretty hammered by about 20 minutes into it. Yes, we get you the mayor of San Jose. You've been to the DMV. God bless you. But at the end of the day, these are commercial driving licenses. They're not driving a Kia, a Toyota. They're driving multi-ton vehicles, and they should be able, even if you are driving a Kia, to be able to read road signs. And in fact, all they really have that they can break out is they break out the racist card. The reality.
Okay, but tell them what Becerra said.
Well, Becerra basically just said, look, isn't that kind of racist to say that people can't English? And by the way, he gave Newsom, this is the part where you really have to take a step back. And this is where the Democratic PAC, if you will, is almost committing, shall we call it, political suicide this time. How did he, Tom, you know the answer to this. When asked how are you going to grade Newsom and how he's done on homeless, what was the grade he gave him?
I thought, didn't he say he gave him an A for effort?
He gave him an A for effort. Look, I wish I'd gone to the college he did. I would have graduated at the top of my class, because even on a curve, we've lost $24 billion, which everybody admits, $24 billion. We don't know where it went. We sunk it in. We gave it to a bunch of people. Oh, look, part of it's corruption. And the homeless problem keeps growing by any metric that you look at. There is no metric, again, that makes it look like the homeless problem is getting better. Even if you're selling tents at this point, you're out of stock. So they have to fall in line with the party PAC. One candidate gave him a B. We could go down the list, but who's got the time? He deserves an F. And that's only because in the standard system, you can't go lower. Gavin Newsom promised when he came into office, he was going to have homeless fixed within whatever X amount of years was. He was going to get us a homeless czar. He then appointed himself. The buck stops at Gavin's desk, and when the buck stops there, apparently a lot of bucks went through his desk, and nobody knows where those bucks are, except, as we've been finding out in the last week, they've gone to friends, family, NGO, to anybody but the homeless, the sick, and the people they're supposed to be defending. And this is the problem. Hold on, I know it's your show, but you invited me in. This is the problem with the Democrats. None of them are willing to stand up and say, look, whether I'm a Democrat, whether I'm an independent, whether I'm peace and freedom, it's not working out. And because they all want to toe the party line because they're afraid of something, and I'm not sure what that is, none of them are willing to break ranks and say it hasn't been working out.
Well, first of all, that F stands for fraud when it comes to Newsom and his ratings, because so much money has disappeared. It has gone to these NGOs that pay themselves big salaries but don't do anything actually productive. Okay, so you raise an interesting point. So they were nice to Newsom. They gave him instead of an F minus. When I was in law school once. There was a teacher in a contracts class who gave out F minuses and F pluses. I thought that was interesting. What do you tell your parents spending all that money on law school that you got an F plus? What do you show promise? So
No, you
you
say, hey,
listen
I'm headed
to
to medical school, but I'm glad you're not my lawyer and my doctor knowing that. Go ahead, back to you.
so they were trying to be nice to Newsom because he hasn't endorsed in the race. But you say you mention all of this, and we could spend a month talking about everything wrong with California. I constantly get asked the question, are Californians really that liberal that they buy this stuff? So what's your answer?
I'm going to say what I'm going to say on stage in about an hour and a half. The biggest party in California is not the Democrats. It is the party of apathy. The problem is that most Californians don't vote. What? Yes, indeed, they don't vote. They don't vote not only for governor, where there will be only 7 million people aggregate, for those of you going who got that F minus, that means total, in the entire primary for all the gubernatorial candidates out of 18 million active, 22 million registered voters. And as you go downstream, meaning in the lower offices, less and less people vote for those offices. That's because when the Democrats scream racist, voter suppression, they're actually talking about themselves looking in the mirror. They've done everything they can in California to keep people from coming out and voting. And it's nice for them to scream at Donald Trump and about all these other acts. But the reality is, California is a perfect example of why the Democratic Party suppresses voting.
All right, so handicap then. We have 6 weeks to go. Ballots come out in 3 weeks. What should voters look for in the last 6 weeks? And you might as well get it out there. Who are you supporting and why?
I'll get it out there immediately. I'm supporting Steve Hilton, and I'm supporting Steve Hilton because as a policy geek, I like the people behind him, like our buddy Ed Ring, et cetera, that are writing the policy. I think he's going to be a better governor. That being said, and I can argue back and forth with my political pundit friends, one of them, which is you, I like what happened at the Republican convention where I was present a couple weeks ago, where there was no endorsement, because I don't want to suppress the enthusiastic Bianco crowd from coming out and voting. We get more Republicans out to vote, it's going to have a big downstream effect. This is what I think is going to happen. I think Hilton is going to finish number one. I think number two in this funny top two tier system we have is going to be very close. I think it is going to be
Wait, close
incredible.
to Hilton or close to the other people 2, 3, and 4?
Well, I wasn't through with my handicap yet, Tom. I wanted to build up a little bit of drama. I think it's going to be close, not necessarily at Hilton. I'm going to predict Hilton by 5 points up against Chad. And I think Chad is going to be 2 or 3 points ahead of the next Democrat. And you may ask who that is.
Chad
And
Bianco for
Chad
listeners.
Bianco, thank you. For those of you at home going, who's Chad? Is it a hanging Chad? No, it's a Sheriff Chad. And that particular, I think it's going to be Sheriff Chad, not Hanging Chad. Well, that would be probably not a bad campaign slogan for him in some of those areas that have the meat eaters in. It's difficult to handicap the Democrats at this point. But I'll tell you, there's some wild card factors that are incredibly interesting and that aren't being talked about much. I think Steyer, because he's spending an inordinate amount of money, okay,
130 million so far on himself.
it's unbelievable. And when you're the only one that likes yourself, you might as well take yourself on a date, which is apparently what he's doing. But I would like to remind you the famous quote from President Michael Bloomberg. Huh? Yes, indeed. Michael Bloomberg spent $1 billion and won Puerto Rico. Okay, so money doesn't always buy you elections. In this case, it won't.
Money can't buy you love?
Well, if it could buy me love, I would have a bigger house, Tom. But that's a story for another day. Money can't buy you certainly elections. It can't buy you popularity, and it can't make you more likable. Look, Tom Steyer is that, even with all his money, came on stage wanting to be the governor of California in a pair of white Nikes the other night, which the press made sure to focus on them. Yes, indeed, let's dress nice and make sure I'm in a pair of tennis shoes. At least get a pair of dark colored tennis shoes so it goes with your suit. So let's put that down. I think it's going to
Okay, but stop before you leave Steyer. The CTA is supporting him. Aren't they going to send their troops out with door knockers and whatever to drive up his vote?
I've talked about this quite often behind the scenes and even on the radio. I think the challenge we have today, right now, is that the unions still, even though they're big, have finite resources. We don't view them as having such. Right now, they're struggling to get a billionaire tax on the ballot and 3 or 4 other things on the ballot. They're going all over the streets, and they're fractionalized even within their own ranks with just resources. Forget even the ideology for a second, because the public unions have grown so big and frankly so obnoxious. They're fighting their teachers, or striking against LA. They're striking up in here. They've got a lot going on. And how much bandwidth, which sounds funny to people, but everything has finite resources, to actually have to go out and campaign for Steyer remains to be seen. But can I talk about a couple other wild cards on this ballot?
Okay, we got a couple minutes left, so let's have it.
Okay, as you know, Betty Yee dropped out of the race the other day. Eric Swadwell kicked himself out of the race. However, they're still on the ballot. What? Yes, indeed. They've dropped out after, the time to withdraw has come. Now, for those of us that are in the politics, we're going like, who would vote for them? But again, the party of apathy, people that aren't necessarily aware of what's going on, may check that box. And that's going to move that needle by 1 or 2 percentage points. And I think that's what
At least I think the two of them will get 3 or 4% of the vote.
Well, you beat me last time, and how many voting on Prop 50? So I'll go with your proposition this time.
Thank you. Wow.
But I'm sure you want to get to the most important subject of this interview, which is me.
Tell us about your Senate race.
Okay, so the Senate race in California, for everyone out there, is huge. I'll be representing close to 1 million people. There's approximately 570,000 voters. My opponent, who I'm not going to mention, can be beaten. She ran for Congress in this area last time, finished 4th in the primaries, and she actually may be indicted, not hyperbole. She's actually opened up a campaign pact to defend herself before the November finals, as I call them, general election comes along. I can win this race. Again, it's dependent on people coming out to vote. That's why both Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton, most importantly to the future of the state of California, are helping me, Mike Netter, because they will drive turnout. And I think Democratic turnout's going to be a little suppressed this time. I plan on winning the state Senate seat, as you said, in social media and other things might do. My name is spread out there. I think I have the coolest literature of everybody. Maybe not the best looking candidate, but don't hold that against me. Netter for a better California. And this is important, because here's the reality, and I want to end on this. The Democrats have a 48% share when it comes to registered voters, but they have about 72% of the legislative seats. We are not properly represented, and that's our fault on the conservative side, because we need to get off our posteriors and get out there and vote and get engaged. And this cycle, I think, is going to be the one where it's going to happen. Back to you, Tom.
What are the cities in your district that you're running?
It is East San Gabriel Valley, it is Pomona, Ontario, Covina, Morovia, those cities in there. It's about 20 different cities. East San Gabriel Valley, right outside Los Angeles, on the top of San Bernardino County.
Okay, what's your campaign website?
Netter.vote.
All right, and Netter News, tell people what that and how they can sign up for
Netter
that.
News is a newsletter that I put out on issues a lot to my district. It's free, and Tom, you do look like you have that kind of money, so I know you subscribe to get out there once a week, and we aggregate and talk about a lot of the news stories that's shocking don't hit the mainstream. You could find that by Googling Netter News. You could find me simply by Googling Mike Netter, a trick I've been taught at home. And you could find me on X at Netter Mike. You could find me on Facebook at my real name, Mike Netter, and LinkedIn in case you happen to have a job, which you may if you're actually listening to the show, at Mike Netter. All over social media. You'll find me on radio. We do a statewide podcast called California Free Radio once a week, and a number of other mediums. If I happen to lose this race, it's not because I'm not well known. And Tom, as I've told you many a time, I always wanted to be rich and not famous. Now I'm broke and well known, so I need your donations. Get out there and shoot me 10, 20 bucks, because it's a good investment so you can stay in the sunshine of California.
All right, boss. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. People visit his site, netter.vote. We'll be right back with more politics and perspectives. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I hope you enjoyed that discussion about California and answered some questions for you. I, of course, know a lot about California, but I don't know as much about Virginia. So I'm asked to come in. My good friend, George Landrith, who lives in Virginia, is a historian himself, very thoughtful guy. What the heck is going on in Virginia? His book there, you see it, his website, Frontiers of Freedom, is his effort. George, welcome to Politics in Perspective.
Well, it's great to be with you, Tom. You are an intelligent man, so I figure my association with you may benefit me, right? People will be like, oh, okay, George is pretty smart because he hangs out with Tom.
I don't know about that, but it may get it may get George Soros after you. So you live in Alexandria, but before we get to that, tell us about Frontiers of Freedom. What's your goal there, and tell us about your book.
Sure. Well, Frontiers of Freedom was founded by Malcolm Wallop. He was a former U.S. senator. He was from Wyoming. He was a friend of Ronald Reagan's. He's the one who introduced Ronald Reagan in the mid-'70s to the need for missile defense. And then Ronald Reagan, of course, made that a centerpiece of his campaign and his presidency. And so we obviously work on things like missile defense, national security, but we're also very constitutionally based, meaning the idea is the rule of law matters and the Constitution matters. And the idea of, if you let freedom ring again. And then the subtitle is, Can Self-Evident Truths Save America from Further Decline? And that's true. Yes, they can. And I think as we look at what helped America go from being 13 insignificant colonies on the world stage to becoming the world's economic, military, cultural, and innovative superpower, I would argue that was our Constitution, because freedom is a tremendously empowering element and foundation. And so both the book and our institute is focused on trying to make sure that America does not forget what made it great and that it continues to support that.
Well, I think picking up on that, there seems to me no doubt in my mind and many others that the current Democrat Party doesn't actually believe in the Constitution. They don't actually believe in the value of freedom. They want runaway mob rule. And we're going to get into how Spamberger is treating that in Virginia. But why don't you comment on the difference between the Constitution, the constitutional principles of what you see in the modern Democrat Party?
Well, you made a good point about the idea of mob rule. Our founders understood that a pure democracy where you vote on everything is very dangerous. And what they basically said was, we're not going to vote on inalienable rights. We're going to vote on policy questions. But whether or not someone has the right to free speech or the right to a fair trial if they're accused of something, that's not something we're going to vote on. We're not going to base it on their popularity. Like a popular person gets a fair trial. An unpopular person, no fair trial. We'll just execute them without a trial. That's what mob rule does. And that's what a democracy is about, if you look at history. So what we have is a democratic republic based on constitutional principles. And so it limits the power of government to take away our inalienable rights. But we still, of course, have voting. And so it's not as if we are against the idea that the populace should be expressing its views on things. An example would be where we might build a park in a town, or whether or not we might build any number of things. Those are questions that the people get to decide. But the people don't get to decide if we're going to, for example, impose slavery again. Our Constitution now says no can do. And we're not going to, for example, allow Nazis to decide we're going to start rounding up Jews and putting them in gas chambers. Again, First Amendment says no can do. And so there's some things we won't vote on, and that's good because that guarantees our freedom. And yet the Democrats seem to want to vote on everything. Free speech, and then they tell the story that their acts of violence are mostly peaceful, but our speech is violent. And it just gives you an idea of how kind of crazy they've become. And it didn't used to be like that. Like in my book, I tell the story about JFK when he had a bunch of Nobel laureates to the White House for lunch. And he told them, never has there been such a collection of intelligence in this room ever before, except when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. And that's not something that a Democrat would say today, because they want to take down his statues. They want to change high school names, street names, make sure they're all erased. But obviously that didn't used to be how it was. So I think it's very troubling to me that as a nation, we used to have a very strong agreement that the Constitution was wonderful, that our founding fathers set us off on a really great path. And as a result of that, we became a very great nation. And now, all of a sudden, they're much more interested in power. They have totalitarian instincts. And so all they want is power, not freedom.
Okay, so let me pick up from there, because they would like to dispense with the Electoral College. They want to pack the Supreme Court. They're in favor of getting rid of the filibusters so that the pace of legislation passage can accelerate. But Madison used to talk about the majority and the tyranny of the majority and what that would mean to the individual. Why don't you give us a quick explanation of the modern Democrat Party versus Madison's view?
Well, you make a very good point, because Madison, our founders didn't hate the majority because they have voting systems, but they did things to limit the majority's power over the minorities. In other words, you have free speech, freedom of religion, all these, due process, all these other guarantees in our Constitution, these inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we don't vote on those. We vote on policy questions. And so, but the Democrats now seem very focused on wanting to get rid of that. And they want to have everything decided by whatever a thin majority might be. And if a thin majority wants to decide that the rest of the country gets screwed, they're happy to do that. And that's just not the way we used to be. It made us a very united nation. That's why we're called the United States, because we were united, and now we're not united. We're very, like you've written a book on called The Divided Era. We've become very divided. And I would argue it's not that we have, for example, differences of opinions. It may be that you have a different favorite food than I have. That doesn't mean we can't be friends. But the reason why we're friends is we have very similar values. And those are strong things you can build a friendship on. You don't have to agree on everything. Like my favorite band could be a different favorite band from yours. That would not destroy a friendship. So I think that's the problem that's happened. You know, the whole point of the way our Constitution is written, everything from how we decide elections, they did not want to just have, like back then, Virginia was the biggest state. And they didn't want to have it be that the biggest state got to kind of force the rest of the country into who the president would be. And that's the beauty of the Electoral College, is it requires there to be some generalized approach to things, and it doesn't let just any one group of people try to dominate. It kind of it forces the candidates to realize that they need to appeal to all over the country, not just say a few cities in the country. And because it could have been back then that if you'd gotten the votes in New York, Philadelphia, and Williamsburg, Virginia, that would make you the president. But because we had the Electoral College, you had to actually try to appeal to voters in all 13 colonies, well, then 13 states.
Yeah, people, I was on air, I don't know which show I was doing, reminding people, or probably educating them, that they didn't even count the popular vote in the initial elections. We had an electoral college for a reason. Okay, so the question today is, what the hell is going on in Virginia? Glenn Youngkin seemed to have things on a good path, but it's a battleground state. It's a pendulum swinging state. Spanberger said that she was going to be a reasonable moderate. You knew she was lying. I knew she was lying. Tell us about this electoral college compact that she has essentially stolen the votes of Virginians. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so she's basically agreed to sign on to the concept that we'll look at the electoral map will no longer be at the Electoral College. It'll be what the popular vote is. And so let's say Virginia an example would be in Virginia, supposedly, I think there might have been some voter fraud, but the popular vote gave a slight advantage to Kamala Harris. If we did what she had done, what she said she's going to do, then the votes in Virginia wouldn't have mattered, because the popular vote was Donald Trump. And so Virginia would have voted for Donald Trump. And of course, I'm not saying that voting for Donald Trump's a bad idea. I'm just saying that what she's trying to do is make sure that as we get Virginia back to being, because it was historically very conservative state, she'll be able to basically tell the voters, we don't care what you think. It doesn't matter to us. We're going to vote this way. And our electoral college votes will be cast based on how people voted in California, New York, Illinois, etc. The Northeast. How Virginians voted will not be relevant. We don't care. It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And yet they claim they favor democracy.
I mean, it's outrageous disenfranchisement. But again, I think the ends justify the means to them, and the ends is power. And so let's go right to the next topic, where this is brutally clear. The redistricting. She said it was wrong. The Democrats go out there and say, oh, the Republicans started this, which is a lie. This round started with New York. And last I checked, it's a pretty blue joint, right? So this map, which we'll put it up on the screen for people to look at, is now might be 8-3, but probably 10-1, maybe 9-2. She said she wasn't going to do this.
Yeah.
And then they put on this ridiculous, do you want the maps to be fair?
Yeah. And that's the fair map.
Yeah.
Where basically half the state gets disenfranchised. Exactly. And
so tell us what, because it passed barely, because it's a swing state. Lots of money from the Democrats came in to do
70
it.
million from out of state money came in. And there was a boatload of mail-in ballots that I think probably were just fraudulent. So I don't think it actually passed. I think it looks like it passed. But if we were to go through and, for example, pass laws that required people to vote with ID and so forth, then it wouldn't have passed. But it is interesting because Democrats have been openly planning this mid-decade redistricting power grab for about a year or more. And then when she was running for office last year, she acted like, oh, no, I don't support that. That's anti-democratic. It's, wrong. And of course, then the first thing she did once she was sworn in was sign the movement and stuff so it could go forward. They passed these maps in the General Assembly, and they rushed a constitutional amendment onto the April special election ballot, which would let them redraw the districts now for the 2026 midterms. And of course, we had a constitutional amendment about 6 years ago that put the process into an independent commission. And our current map is very fair, and it's not decided by politicians directly. The state legislature has to approve of it, but the map is written by this commission, and then it's submitted to the legislature, and the legislature can't alter it. They can either vote it up or they can vote it down. If they vote it down, then the commission can try again. And it just goes that way. So it's kind of a check and a balance process. But when she ran for office, she repeatedly acted like she didn't support gerrymandering. And of course, she does. And she, it's just
okay. So
muddy.
A judge, circuit court judge, said it was unconstitutional, blocked it. But he's been overridden before. Right. I read his opinion. People listening know that I've been an attorney for 40 years. This is my 40th year. The one that blew me away the most is this 90-day rule. How are they going to get around that?
Well, I think that's the thing why I think there's a good chance that his ruling that just came out again, because the Supreme Court overruled him, but not on legal grounds. They just said, we're just going to wait and see what the public has to say about this. And so I don't agree with that, because I think if we were going to hold a vote on whether we should reinstall slavery, or whether or not we should start executing Jews, or whether or not we should abolish free speech, I would hope that rather than having the vote, they would just say, no, our Constitution says you can't do that, and we're not going to. But at any rate, the interesting thing is the lawsuit, we have very clear standards. One, in order to change this, the requirement was it had to be done in 2 separate legislative sessions with an election fully in between them. That way, if they voted once on it and they got then voted out of office, they couldn't do it a second time. So it was to make sure the public really was going to be supportive of this whole concept. Of course, they violated that. They just did it once. And so the bottom line is and
they also, going back to my 90-day thing, the second time they quote unquote passed this, or the first time legitimately, you're supposed to wait 90 days, and they waited 60 something.
Right.
I mean, how the hell do they get away with that?
Well, I think that's the reason why they won't. And that's why the district court in Virginia just like a day after the election ruled it unconstitutional. But I think, so we're going to find out something very interesting about about the Virginia Supreme Court, because if they follow the law as written and the Constitution as written, then they will uphold this. But if they're political gamesmanship types, then they'll overrule it. And so we're going to have a real test here. I mean, the reality is we'll find out probably within the next week to 10 days if the Virginia Supreme Court is a serious law-abiding court, or if it's just a political bunch of actors. And I will not respect them. And I say that because I don't have to respect them if they act in a way that is outside the Constitution, outside the rule of law. And my hope would then be that at some point, the legislature and the governor would remove them from office, because it is, I don't want to remove people from office just because I don't always agree with them. I'm talking about when you violate the Constitution very clearly, not just as a matter of opinion, but it's just, there's several standards. They violated the Constitution like in 3 different ways when they passed this thing and did this thing. So if the court can't find a violation there, that means they're either profoundly stupid people or they're profoundly political people, but they don't give a hoot about the law, the rule of law, or the Constitution.
Well, there is choice C, which is both of the above.
Yeah, it could be all of the above.
We're out of time. I do want to go back to start. You mentioned Thomas Jefferson, my favorite Virginian, you excluded, of course, where his great fear was the judiciary, people who would grab power and with really no check on them. Now he's talking about the federal judiciary, who gets lifetime appointments, but the same would apply here. When I was in California, I sued Jerry Brown because he ran for attorney general. He won, but the law said he had to be active 3 out of the last 5 years as an attorney leading up to the election. Well, he had suspended his license and clearly didn't qualify, but a judge ruled substantial compliance. In other words, they just tore up the law and said literally the horseshoe qualification, which is close enough, right? George, appreciate your friendship. Appreciate you bringing me on your show on AUN TV, but that's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for watching Politics and Perspective, and we'll see you next week.